Hello, and welcome to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. And in today's episode, I'm talking with Boyd, who arrived in Australia at 18 years of age from Zimbabwe. And I'm going to talk to him today about his experiences of growing up and going to school in Zimbabwe during a time of great change for the country. And also getting some of his reflections on some of the advice his father gave to the family to help them adjust to their new home in Australia. So, let's get into it and see what Boyd's got to say. First question, pretty simple. Tell us about where did you grow up?
So, Zimbabwe, I was born in Harare, which was previously known as Salisbury, during the Rhodesian days. In 1970, I spent the first 12 years of my life in Harare and then moved to a town called Bulawayo and ended up at high school on the border of Botswana and Zimbabwe, therefore for my high schooling years. And then in 88, moved to Perth, Australia.
So, can you describe a bit what it was like growing up in Harare or Salisbury? What kind of place was it?
Growing up, so the first 10 years of my life, there was still obviously a lot of fighting. The war was on, the Independence War. And, there were issues, obviously, safety issues. But I've got to say, I couldn't think of a better way to be brought up. It was an amazing country. And the freedoms that we had, you just get... In the afternoon, you'd be sent out to play with your friends as long as you're home by nighttime. Everything was fine. So no mobile phones, nothing like that. It's just the bush telegraph. If mum or dad needed to get you home, you'd send a houseboy or a garden boy or somebody out to find you and bring you home. So it was a wonderful upbringing.
So what were the sort of typical activities for a child in Zimbabwe at that time?
Well, during school, we would go to school, finish at lunchtime, and then we would have sports in the afternoon, school sports. So the sport at the primary and senior school level in Zimbabwe was magnificent. It was all, taken by teachers, and it was a full afternoon of sport. And then, back home for a bath and some dinner and to bed and all over again. So, wonderful times. A lot of very, very close friends. Even I still have them today, going back to when I was 10, 11, 12, and certainly high school friends, given that where I was a boarding school. So they became family. So, 450 brothers, it was, it was a good time.
Yeah. So were you, in your school years, were you aware of the situation going on in Rhodesia?
In junior school, as I say, independence was in 1980. Dad was fighting in that war, so I didn't see a lot of him for those first 10 years of my life. In actual fact, my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, saw Dad for a grand total of about 4 months in her first 10 years of life. So he was always out in the bush doing what he did. And, you would occasionally see mum in tears because somebody she knew didn't get through the war, and just hoping, fingers crossed, that we wouldn't get the call and it would be Dad at some stage. So there was stresses and things like that, but understand, of course, that I was 10 years of age when that all finished. So it's what I was brought up with. It was what I was used to. So life still went on. I used to go to school. I had my mates. I used to play sport. Weekends were pretty full with sporting matches, and down at the local sporting club, watching the cricket and hockey and tennis and so on. It was a full life.
And it sounds like it was quite an ordered sort of way of living for a child as well.
Yeah, and incredibly, believe it or not, incredibly safe. My parents didn't think twice if I wanted to walk off to school or ride to school or go to, the sports club or go over to a mate's house, something like that, who's 3, 4, 5 Ks away. I would just go. I'm going to, Jeff's house. See you later. And off I'd go. And there would be no issues.
So the area where you lived, was it a built-up area, suburban area?
Yeah. So it was a town called Marlborough, and that's in Harare. And just a suburb of Harare, where we grew up, sort of middle class, certainly not the low class and certainly not the high class, but, lots of friends around and very safe.
Yeah. And did you mentioned that you went to boarding school?
Boarding school, yeah.
Was that for high school?
For high school. for high school. It's a school by the name of Plumtree High School. An unbelievable school. And I could be corrected here, but at one stage there were more Rhodes Scholars out of Plumtree High School than any other school in the world. Yeah. So wonderful school. Very discipline orientated. There was, which it had to be, going through the war, being out in the middle of the bush. I mean, it was 100 kilometers away from the closest town. There had to be very almost like a military type school, where if a senior to you told you to do something, you did it without question. So the discipline was there, and yeah, you knew if you didn't do as you were told, you'd cop a bit.
And so I guess if it's so far out, it was sort of a bit of a self-contained little.
Yeah, so it's in a little town called Plumtree, which is, most of the population were the schoolboys at the school. And it was all, like I said, self-contained. We had all our sporting fields and, graze halls, and we had our own little hospital. And we had a big parcel of land that was attached to the school that, during the weekends, if you wanted to go out camping or go out for the day and go fishing or whatever, you could go and do that. In high school, let's not forget, by the time I went to high school, it was now Zimbabwe. It was an independent country. It was being run by ex-President Mugabe. In short, at primary school, no, I didn't know. But it's not something as an 8-year-old that you're actually looking for. Was there inequality? Absolutely. Looking back on it, absolutely. Was it right? No, it wasn't right. But having said that, the unemployment was very low. Everybody had a job, black or white. I had several friends that were black that used to come over to the house, and we'd mess around outside or swim or play tennis or whatever it was. Some of my best mates at primary school were black kids.
Right. So there wasn't the level of segregation there was in South Africa?
Never was. Well, certainly not while I've been alive. That's not to say back in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s, maybe, I don't know. But, South Africa was next level. So, there was a degree of class, like there was a bit of a separation between that class and that class. Nothing compared to what it's like now.
Going to high school in Zimbabwe at the time, what did you have any sort of dreams or hopes for the future? What was sort of...
Listen, after independence in 1980, I remember Dad coming home, and I remember him coming home once, the new regime was going to be put into place after Mugabe had won the election. And understandably, he was a little bit upset and decided, that's it, we're packing up, we're leaving, we're going over to Australia. Bearing in mind that my grandparents were living here, both my uncles were living here, so it was a matter of being sponsored by them to come out. So that was in 1980. We put the wheels in motion to come to Australia. He was offered a job in Bulawayo, which is Matabeleland, where Plumtree High School was, with BP and Shell on specific contract for a term of. So he took that up. We applied to come to Australia in 1983, and towards the end of 1987 we were eventually accepted into Australia. It was a long drawn out process, many interviews, many medical exams and so on. And then of course I wasn't privy to it, but a lot of paperwork that was being done, and a lot of letters to and from grandparents and uncles to Dad, backwards and forwards to the Australian government and so on. So it all took a long time. I finished my schooling there, and we eventually got the nod to come out at the end of 1987, and we packed everything up, what we were allowed to take anyway, and were in Australia, Perth, landed in Perth in May of 1988.
Yeah. And so, it's quite a young age for such a big move, I guess. Yeah. So how did you feel about it at the time?
At the time, obviously when I was in Zimbabwe, I had, like I said, 450 brothers from school, it was a lot of friends. And whilst in Zimbabwe and going through all the farewells and everything else, heartbroken. I knew that it was for the best, but still, at that age, 18 years of age, saying goodbye to, all your mates, girlfriend, etc., etc. It was difficult. It was difficult getting on the plane. But the minute we were on the plane, we were upgraded to first class, so that helped. So we got on the pointy end and headed over. We arrived in Perth, and a friend of my dad's came to pick us up at the airport, and we were going off for a seafood lunch because we'd been landlocked in Zimbabwe. We didn't get any seafood over there. So the first thing Dad wanted to do was have a lobster. So as we were leaving the airport, interestingly, Dad turned around, I was in the back seat, turned around and said, "Boyd, I want you to remember this. You were born in Zimbabwe. You were brought up in Zimbabwe. You love the country. You love the people there. But this is Australia. And what I'd like you to do is whenever you're talking about Australia to people, you need to refer to Australia as being home. Zimbabwe is a place you were born and bred in, and you will always love the place and the people there, but it's not your home anymore. Australia is your home." And psychologically, I think that has helped me hugely, because there are a lot of Zimbabweans and South Africans that I know that have come across and have always referred to Zimbabwe and South Africa as home. Yeah. And I think it makes it all the more difficult to settle somewhere when you don't accept the place that you're in as home. And it's just a word. And for the first couple of years, actually, or first 18 months, I actually physically had to remind myself, Australia is home. Okay, well, what do you think of Australia? Australia is home. Yeah. But it helped. And I've never had an inkling to go back and live in Zimbabwe again. Just, putting aside all the nonsense that's going on over there and has been for a few years now. I've never had that pull to go back and live there.
What would you say are some of the key differences that you might have noticed between Zimbabwe and Australia?
Well, it's interesting. We had the choice, came out in '88, of coming to Perth or come to Tasmania, where my uncles lived and who were sponsoring us out, and my grandparents. So we had that choice. We decided Perth. And the reason, well, when I say we decided, my parents decided Perth and I was along for the ride. Now, the reason I'm led to believe that they chose Perth was twofold. One, it was that much closer to Zimbabwe if we needed to get back, because my eldest brother was still there with his wife and 3 kids. So it was close to get back, well, closer than Tasmania anyway, because back then, of course, you'd have to fly from here to Melbourne, Sydney, to Perth, to Madagascar, and so on and so forth. And 2, Perth was probably the closest from what we saw in the time that we'd been over and had a look for, holidays and things like that, was the closest setup to what Zimbabwe was. Same sort of climate, same sort of extracurricular activities and sporting clubs and so on and so on. So, and also there were an awful lot of Zimbabweans that
I was going to say that
were living there.
I think Perth has got one of the biggest concentrations of South Africans in Zimbabwe.
South African Zimbabweans, yeah.
In fact, when I was living there, there's a South African club.
Yeah.
There, I remember going past it.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of an expat.
There is a bit of an expat, but you see what we did differently to what a lot of South Africans and Zimbabweans do is when they do come over here, they literally go out and look for South Africans and Zimbabweans to socialize with and to have their braais with and drink their beer with and so on and so forth. Whereas we didn't do that. We became friendly with our neighbours through people we met through work, through the sporting clubs and so on and so forth. So the majority we knew a lot of Zimbabweans, we knew a lot of South Africans, but it wasn't as if we were living in their pocket. Yeah. And what happens with a lot of them that do live in one another's pocket, then they start talking about, if we went back to South Africa, if we went back to Zimbabwe, we could do this and we could do that and we could make a plan to do this and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, they're back in Africa. Or they go to an Australian's house and it's all about, remember when we. So therefore so they become known as the Wenwies. We never did that. We would go and see friends that we knew from Zimbabwe and we might have a dinner with them or something like that, but it wasn't something that we would do every weekend, and big group of people. And, don't get me wrong, there are times that could be 20 Zimbabweans in a place that you end up at, and you'll have a knees up massive bender, but but it's not something that you do we certainly didn't do every weekend.
Father really wanted to draw a line under the Zimbabwean history and make sure you all had a new start here.
Absolutely. And I can understand why he did that. Yeah. And if it were me in his shoes, I would want to do the same with my kids, because it's important. I mean, I'm one that you can't look back. I mean, that's history. You've got to look at what the future holds. And if you're always looking over your shoulder as to, what's happened, it clouds the future, and you can't move on.
So, bit of a fast forward. How did you end up in Tasmania?
I was managing Win TV in WA for almost 10 years. So they brought me over. They brought me over July last year to work for Win, and fast forward that through to November, we parted company. And thinking that, okay, well, I've got a bit of holidays due to me. I'll take a little bit of time off, and then I'll look for something else, and we'll see where we go from there. And then COVID hit. So yes, yeah. So I'm now not working. I'm just doing a little bit of work for people here and there, advising. Just generally trying to keep busy.
When you do say you're from Zimbabwe to Australians, what are some of the reactions that you typically would get?
Generally, somebody will say to me, "Oh, you're from South Africa."
Because of the accent?
Yeah. And I'll say, well, close, but I'm from Zimbabwe. And occasionally they'll go, "Oh, what's the difference?"
Right. Is that a sore point for Zimbabweans?
I think, listen, from what I can see, people that left Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, sort of the time I did, it can get frustrating, because there was always that rivalry between Zimbabwe and South Africa on the sporting fields and so on and so forth. And of course, Zimbabwe being British heritage and South Africa being Dutch heritage, there was always it was a Australia-New Zealand type rivalry.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I when somebody asks me, "Oh, well, what's the difference between South Africans?" I'll act as if I'm annoyed with them. What do you mean, But you can understand that. I don't think I've got a strong African accent, but you put me in a room with 20 Zimbabweans, and before I know it, I've got a broad African accent again, and speaking the local language, which I didn't even know I knew. Oh, it's just crazy when you get to
well, you tend to mirror other people.
I think so. I think so.
Environment.
Yeah, I think I knew a Scottish guy once that was asked, when are you going to change your accent? He'd been out of Scotland for 50 years, and he said, "When I find a better one."
Yeah. Well, I guess it's one of those things when you've got it, it just becomes part of you, and if you changed it,
part of your identity.
Yeah, if you changed it, it wouldn't be you anymore.
Yeah.
But you've been back to Zimbabwe
Yes, a few times. I first went back there in 1990. I went back there for the first time. Again, back then, everything seemed okay. There was a little bit of US dollars being traded on the black market or British pounds on the black market. But, back then, the black market for a British pound to a Zimbabwe dollar was 10 to 1. And then every time I went back there, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. You had poor people over there that are retired, living comfortably on their pension, month in, month out, to when the hyperinflation happened, the money that they were going to get for an entire year on their pension wasn't enough to buy a loaf of bread. It was just ludicrous, just crazy stuff. So I've been back a few times. Last time I was back was about 7 years ago. I took Dad back there and we went fishing on Lake Kariba. I mentioned that place a little earlier, just on a houseboat. Went floating around the lake, which is a big lake. It's not just a little 10-acre lake. I mean, it's good size. Lots of game, fishing for tiger fish, not tiger.
Okay. Swimming tigers.
It was great. And taking Dad back there was the last time that I think he's going to make it to Africa. And, we're out on the lake and he was, pointing out spots where he had been deployed to during the war years and, telling me a few stories of what happened there and what they did there, and which was the first time he actually opened up to me about what actually happened when he was out there. I've always looked at Dad as being this old bloke that, a lot of history and a lot of experience and everything else. And about 4 years ago, my mum actually said to me, "Did you know that your dad was younger than you are now when you came out to Australia?" And I just thought, bloody hell. Yeah. So that was the first time. He was 70 years of age, and it was the first time that he opened up with pretty much anybody with regard to, what happened and,
So do you think he'd been trying to forget about it, or he was just wanting to sort of protect you from this past?
I don't know. I don't know if he wanted to forget about it, but I don't think it was something that he wanted to talk about with family. I'm sure that if he got together with some of his army mates, they would reminisce about it. But I think he probably wanted to shelter his family from it because the war ended in 1980. Yeah. It was a month before my eldest brother was about to be called up and taken, at the age of 18 years of age, to be thrust into something like that. So as far as when the war ended, it couldn't have happened at a better time. The war finished and thanks very much, you're on your own. Yeah. And I don't think it was just an African thing. I think anybody that comes back from war should be taken aside and offered the help that they need.
Yeah. Have a debriefing process.
Oh, yeah, but I think it needs to go further than that. Yeah. There's debriefing and there's actually, sitting down and somebody digging into it and getting their feelings out. Yeah. Because I think after 35 years of him being in the war, what was coming out was something that he probably should have spoken about, a lot earlier than that.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear a lot of stories of a similar nature about men who've come back from conflicts and don't talk about it, and then just it can manifest itself years later in various ways. Yeah. Even and in the old days, like after the Second War, people just didn't really know what it was.
No. I think also Africans being Africans, I can handle this myself. I can do this. Yeah. I don't need to see anybody. I can. And then the night terror set in, and then this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned to me before that your father suffered from that.
Yeah, I used to go fishing with him every year out onto the Abrolhos Islands, which is just off the Geraldton coast in WA. And we'd just be on in the fishing hut, and we'd just be in the room. He'd have a bed there, I'd have a bed here, and you'd go there for 10 nights, and probably 6 or 7 of those nights you'd wake up and you'd be, shouting and, thrashing around in bed and pushing imaginary people away and get out, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
But that's also part of the whole story of the country as well, isn't it?
That's right.
There was a whole generation of people who were affected by that conflict in different ways.
I saw a photo the other day of a couple of guys in a helicopter heading out during the Rhodesian War, young white guys, and I promise you, mate, I looked at that and I don't know if it's because I'm getting a bit older, but they looked like they were about 12 years of age. Right. And they were there with their weapons, being flown into conflict zone, just looking at each other going, you could almost read in their minds, like, what have we got ourselves into? And it's crazy. I mean, I've got 2 kids, one's 23, one's 19, and I'm thinking my 19-year-old, God, he would have been, in the services in conflict for a couple of years now already. Yeah. Had it been back in those times, Yeah. It's a scary thought.